These are the most interesting vintage photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. A Komsomol ticket with the inscription, "I will die, but not a step back." The soldier knew that it was forbidden to retreat. His own people were shooting for it. He chose death, but not disgrace. Miniature handmade wooden plane, mid-19th century. It was used for fine decoration of furniture and carved elements. Such tools were often made by craftsmen themselves, at hand, with individual engraving and decoration. A US Army soldier with an M1 carbine rifle in a trench next to a tamed fox. The photo was taken during exercises in the United States during the Second World War. The animal was kept as a mascot of the unit. Around 1943, Salvador Dali sold Yoko Ono a dry blade of grass for $10,000, passing it off as a hair from his famous moustache. He was sure that she was a witch and was using her hair for witchcraft, so he replaced a strand with a random blade of grass from the garden. Yoko didn't notice the catch and paid the full amount. Rabindranath Tagore, during a visit to Berlin in 1930, the Indian poet, philosopher and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, arrived in Germany as part of a European tour with lectures on culture and humanism. The picture was taken on the street in front of the Esplanade Hotel. A stone tomb in the form of a relief image of a knight, presumably of the 13th-14th centuries, is located in the cemetery in Skybost, on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. An armoured figure with a sword is considered to be the tombstone of a crusader associated with the Norman nobility of the region. The monument is partially preserved, covered with moss and erosion. American soldiers in a snowy trench during the Battle of the Bulge. The operation took place in December 1944, January 1945, and became the largest offensive of the German army on the Western Front. In the picture, soldiers of the 1st US Army are holding the line in conditions of severe frosts and snowdrifts. Men play faro in a saloon in Bisbee, Arizona, circa 1900. The game of faro was one of the most popular gambling games on the American frontier of the 19th century. The scene reflects the everyday saloon culture in the West in the period before the prohibition of gambling. The Niagara swinging bathtub was invented in the 1900s to simulate sea waves. It was recommended to patients and children as a substitute for sea bathing. The tub was rocking without water. 3 buckets were enough. American soldiers at the Arsenal on Manor Road, 1935, preparing to be sent to the camp. Everyone holds a rolled-up mattress, a standard piece of temporary accommodation equipment. The picture was taken in Staten Island, New York. Before the internet era, concert tickets were bought in person, standing in queues, often overnight. These faded 1980s tickets hold the memory of performances by bands like The Cure, New Order, Duran Duran and R.E.M., and a time when live rock was part of everyday life. A man on the veranda of a tourist log cabin, 1930. A young couple from Ohio stopped here on their way to Niagara Falls. Back then, such roadside cabins were a popular alternative to hotels. The inscription "Diner" indicated the name of a particular hut. A young worker holds a protest poster, USA, circa 1930. He dropped out of school to earn $21 a week, more than his teacher earned, $17.78. The photo reflects the crisis in the education system during the Great Depression. A unique cylindrical calendar and sundial made by Wolfgang Fugger in 1563. The mechanism made it possible to determine the time and date based on astronomical positions. Such a device was not just a scientific instrument, but a symbol of knowledge and status in the Renaissance. 22-year-old Lucille Ball in soccer gear, 1934. Before her fame in I Love Lucy, she participated in comedy episodes and photo shoots. Here on the set with the Three Stooges, wearing a Spalding helmet and protective gear. Family picnic on Huntington Beach, California, 1937. People relax around the campfire, roast food, play the ukulele, and read the newspaper, all against the background of two new 1937 Ford cars. Ernest Hemingway, with his three sons and captured marlins, Bimini, 1935. The great writer was not only a hunter of words, but also a passionate fisherman. This picture at the marina captured one of his successful sea trips to the Bahamas. A Native American woman with a child at a train station, USA, circa 1930. A traditional dress, a leather cape, and a belt with beads. A photographic document of the era of resettlement and land loss. The Daily Times Herald on May 23, 1934, with the sensational headline, "Clyde and Bonnie riddled with bullets. Legendary robbers." Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were shot dead by police in an ambush in Louisiana. The car was riddled with bullets. The criminal couple was not given a single chance. Circus performer Harriet Houdini helps clown Otto Griebling apply makeup, 1935. The scene was filmed backstage before the performance at a time when the circus was living its real, everyday life. A woman driving an experimental Dinosphere, circa 1931. The one-wheeled vehicle, invented by John Archibald Purvis, was supposed to be the car of the future, but it turned out to be impractical and unstable. Folk musician Lyd Belly and his wife Marta, 1935. One of the most influential bluesmen of the 20th century, the author of Goodnight Irene, poses in a rare moment of personal happiness off stage.
John J. McFarland takes a kitten out of the mailbox in St. George, 1938. An unknown person threw the animal inside like an ordinary letter. The case got into the press and caused a public outcry.
Hulk Hogan, wrestling star of the 1980s, at home by the phone. In that era, he became an icon of pop culture. Even those who had never watched wrestling knew him. George Kelsey operates the Whirlwind attraction on Midland Beach, 1933. Engineers manually checked each bolt, ensuring the safety of wooden roller coasters in the era before automation. Celebrating Joe Louis's victory over Primo Carner, Harlem, June 25, 1935. The picture captures the historic moment when the champion boxer was greeted as a national hero, a symbol of pride and hope for the African-American community. Jean de Celis-Longchamp, a Belgian-born pilot in the Royal Air Force, single-handedly attacked the Gestapo headquarters in Brussels on January 20, 1943. His family was killed by the Nazis, and he responded with an airstrike, delivering a precision airstrike on the building. Dick Williams spent more than 6 hours waist-deep in icy water after the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. The doctors insisted on amputation of his legs, but he refused. 8 years later, he became the winner of Wimbledon in doubles. Disney studio artists discuss how to animate water bubbles for Pinocchio, 1939. The film was a visual breakthrough, and every scene was worked out manually, down to the shape of the bubbles in the bottle. Soviet citizens who were abducted to Germany return home across the bridge in Magdeburg, 1945. A man carries a rolled-up bundle with things, a symbol of survival and the end of the war. In the background is a column of people coming from the east through a ruined Europe. A glove-shaped brand, England, 1642 to 1649. It was used to burn signs on the skin of criminals or deserters. The symbols were pressed with red-hot metal, a method of public punishment during the English Civil War. Premier Electric coffee grinder, USA, 1930. Double metal hoppers fed grains to grinding shafts driven by an electric motor. It was used in cafes and shops where fast grinding of a large volume of coffee was required. Bugatti Type 41 Royale, 1931. one of the most luxurious cars in history, more than 6 meters long and weighing about 3 tons. It was created for the European aristocracy, but only 6 copies were sold due to the Great Depression. Niagara Falls completely froze during the extreme cold of 1933. Streams of water turned into massive ice cliffs, and people walked freely along the frozen river at the foot of the waterfall, a sight impossible today due to modern prohibitions and risks. Female customers at the counter of Jack's Saloon in Hot Springs, Arkansas, 1935. The bar was famous for the rude jokes on the signs, the cheap booze, and the pay or don't drink policy. The era of the Great Depression. Irony, homemade signs, and moonshine for 15 cents. An FBI agent is ambushed during a kidnapping investigation, 1933. The Great Depression era spawned a wave of high-profile crimes, and the FBI actively used field surveillance and surveillance techniques. The appearance of Mickey Mouse at the Thanksgiving Day Parade, New York, 1934. The huge helium balloon became part of the legendary Macy's March, firmly cementing its place in American pop culture. It was the first year that Disney characters entered the parade. A blind World War I veteran on the streets of the USA, 1932. The plaque on his chest reads, "I gave away my eyes." After the war, thousands of veterans were left without support, and many found themselves on the streets begging for the sacrifices they had made. Willys 77 sedan, 1936. One of the cheapest production cars in the USA. Consumption of 6 liters per 100 kilometers. In the background is the Union Pacific M100,000 Streamliner train, the world's first diesel-electric train made of aluminum. French sundial of the 18th century. A vertical cylinder showed the time and date based on the position of the shadow from the curly gnomon. The folding disc was used for astronomical calculations. They were used for navigation and accurate time measurement before the advent of precision mechanical watches. A man in a suit poses on the Great Wall of China, 1930. The photo reflects a rare case of intercontinental travel before World War II, an era when travel to Asia was available to only a few.
The first Krispy Kreme bakery, Winston-Salem, 1937. Founded by Vernon Rudolph, who sold donuts directly from the window and later began to supply them to stores. This is how the brand's legend began. Your grandfather on the ice in a Chicago Blackhawks uniform, 1935. An era when helmets were not yet mandatory and the game was tough and uncompromising. One of the rare images that capture the dynamics of hockey in those days. An American crew at an M1A1 75mm howitzer on Bougainville Island, Papua New Guinea, December 1943. The gun covered the airfield of Tarakan from Japanese attacks. Camouflage made of twigs and nets, sandbags and tents faces is a typical field frontier of the Pacific Campaign. Gold rush prospectors, late 19th century. Men with washing trays and shovels are working at the locks in the hope of a major find. Most of them never got rich. The gold went into banks, but dirt and hard work remained for them. Workers are laying railway tracks, the beginning of the 20th century. Manual labour, shovels and picks, no machinery. It was through such efforts that the infrastructure that connected America from coast to coast was built. An advertising clipping from the 1950s, the electric shaver haircutting guide metal device made it possible to turn an ordinary Remington, Schick or Norelco electric shaver into a clipper. The kit cost $2.98 and included instructions. A full set with a razor from $25.95 to $30.50. A simple and cheap alternative to a hairdresser for post-war American housewives. Electric vest for American police officers, 1932. The power went through the contacts in the sidewalk. It was used to heat patrolmen on duty in winter. Stan Lee served in the US Army Communications Department during World War II. A decade after this photo, he created the Marvel Universe. A man clears a path on an ice floe along Lemon Creek, Staten Island, January 1939. It was part of the daily delivery of shellfish to Lower Bay. The seafood trade depended on the manual clearing of reservoirs during the winter season. Women register for classes at the Continuation School at 304 Clinton Avenue, 1935. Such schools provided education to young working women. The training was conducted in his spare time and included office work, English, and the basics of economics. Franklin D. Roosevelt's second inauguration took place on January 20th, 1937, for the first time since the date was changed under the 20th Amendment. Earlier, the inaugurations were held on March 4th. The innovation shortened the period between the elections and the inauguration of the president. Triangular, hand-rolled notes were a popular way of communicating between school children before the era of mobile phones. They were exchanged secretly in class, passed on through classmates. It was a whole culture with codes, styles, and waiting for a response. Audio tapes for self-hypnosis, like this one from the New Life Institute in 1980, promised to help quit smoking and solve dozens of other problems through the subconscious. They were sold en masse, despite their questionable effectiveness. Sally Halterman became the first woman to obtain a motorcycle license in Washington in 1937. This happened despite protests and doubts from the authorities, who considered riding a motorcycle unsuitable for women. Carnival of Art Students, November 1988, East Germany. The marchers carried homemade costumes, masks, and giant dolls, often with satirical and political overtones. The parade took place on the streets of the cities of the GDR, despite censorship and control. The result of the German bombing of Manchester, December 1940. During the 2 nights of the raids, the so-called Manchester Blitz, hundreds of buildings were destroyed, and more than 650 people were killed. In the photo, firefighters are fighting a fire among the ruins of the city centre. Soldiers of the 503rd Parachute Ski Battalion of the US Army relax in sleeping bags in the snow during exercises. The unit was preparing for combat operations in harsh winter and mountainous terrain. The training included ski marches with full gear. During the break, the lumberjack workers got carried away with a card game, which turned into a conflict. The scene was shot against the background of a forest hut, probably at the end of the 19th century. Catholic priests perform a Nazi salute at a youth gathering in Berlin in 1933. After Hitler came to power, many church leaders cooperated with the Nazi regime, hoping to preserve the church's influence in Germany. A luxurious lounge on the upper deck of a Boeing 747, early 1970s. Airlines offered lounge areas with sofas, bars, and carpeting in an effort to attract upper-class passengers. Later, such interiors disappeared due to space savings and an increase in the number of seats. Children's carousel with manual drive in Cuba, 1990s. The cabins are made from the hulls of old aerial bombs, redesigned for seats. In the face of shortages and embargoes, Cubans made extensive use of military waste in their everyday lives. A Cold War spy device developed by the CIA, masquerading as a tree stump, made it possible to covertly place the device in a wooded area. The built-in antennas intercepted air defense and radar signals, transmitting data to the satellite. WPA workers removed the barrier for the first car entering the new Ramona Boulevard Road at the intersection with Huguenot Avenue, 1939. The construction was funded by the federal agency WPA as part of the New Deal program to combat the Great Depression. John B. Holland, one of the last surviving Civil War veterans, cast his vote in the 1934 election. The image is significant as it captures a rare moment where a person who lived through the Civil War participates in an election several decades later. The opening day of the Staten Island Zoo, captured in 1936, features notable figures such as Governor Alfred E. Smith, Robert Moses, and Joseph Palmer. The crowd is seen admiring exhibits as part of the highly anticipated event. St. Vincent's Hospital ambulance after an accident at the intersection of Forest and Bement Streets. The picture was taken in 1935. A group of local residents gathered around the car, watching the aftermath of the accident. Cosmetology lesson at McKee Vocational School, St. George District, 1939. The students practiced their facial skincare skills under the guidance of a teacher. The program included practical training in beauty procedures that were in demand in the salons of that time. Car restaurant in Los Angeles, 1936. A uniformed waitress takes an order right at the car window. The drive-in format was just beginning to gain popularity. The menu includes 15 20-cent sandwiches, homemade pies, and chili con carne. A couple rides a snowmobile decorated with hearts in 1965. On the hood is the inscription Snow Haven, which may be the name of a recreation centre or resort. Paratroopers of the 555th Battalion of the USA, triple nickels, before jumping from the C-47, 1945, the first African-American airborne unit to participate in missions to protect the United States from Japanese fireballs. An instructor at the Red Cross School demonstrates how to make a life jacket out of jeans. USA, 1953. 6-year-old Richard Baranski became the champion of the cranberry pie eating competition in 1948. He ate a 10-inch pie in a record 15 seconds. The competition was conducted without the use of hands. The winner received a paper crown with the title. The picture was taken in 1947. The great-grandfather, a professional weightlifter, holds his grandson above his head with one hand. In the other hand, there is a box with bottles of milk from Penn Dairy. 1976. The arcade driving simulator is one of the first attractions with video game elements. The girl controls the car in a booth with a steering wheel and pedals, simulating real driving. Similar devices became the forerunners of Atari racing arcades. Buttery Store and Skaggs Pharmacy in Montana, 1960s. A typical shopping mall of the time with extensive parking and a bright neon sign. Cars, from station wagons to sedans, reflect the US middle-class fleet. American assault troops disembark from an amphibious assault LVT, Alligator, on the island of Morotai. The operation took place in September 1944 as part of the campaign to liberate Dutch New Guinea from Japanese occupation. On March 19, 1899, Russia's first ambulance station began operating in St. Petersburg. Horse-drawn carriages and specially equipped carriages were used to transport the patients, as shown in the picture. The initiative belonged to Dr. Fedor Gaz, and the service became the prototype of a modern ambulance. On the tombstone of Irish Marjorie McCall is engraved, "Lived once, buried twice." According to legend, she was buried alive during a fever epidemic in the 18th century. After waking up from fainting in a coffin during an attempted robbery, she returned home, where, according to legend, her husband died of shock. Later, she actually died and was reburied. Spanish engineers are testing a pressurized suit for flights at an altitude of 20 kilometers. Photo from 1935. Such suits protected balloon pilots from the cold and low pressure in the stratosphere. A street in Hazen, Nevada, 1905. The photo shows the Shamrock Saloon, Joe Dempsey's restaurant and establishment typical of the Wild West era. Women in front of the Klondike Dance Hall and Saloon in Seattle, Washington, 1909. Such establishments were popular during the gold rush. An advertising device from the middle of the 20th century is a breathing balloon. He promised to improve the shape of his chest and train breathing by measuring lung volume with a valve. It was distributed from Detroit, Michigan. A French Army scooter with a 75mm recoilless cannon developed in the 1950s. Instead of bags, there are 6 artillery shells. It was used for mobile support on the battlefield. The 1908 Fritschel electric car could travel up to 160 km on a single charge. It was popular among women because of its ease of operation and lack of exhaust. With the advent of the cheap gasoline-powered Ford Model T, interest in electric vehicles disappeared for decades. A Chinese woman in the 1930s who managed to get an education and become a professor of physics is an exception for her time. At that time, women in China had a low social status and rarely had access to higher education. Student Jacob Wade works on an electromechanical hacksaw at the McKee Vocational High School, New York, 1935. Back then, such machines were actively used in the training of skilled workers. Margaret Hamilton, known for her role as the Wicked Witch of the West, reunited with her furry partner in the movie The Wizard of Oz on the set of the comedy Twin Beds, 1942. The scene was a rare behind-the-scenes moment with the iconic actress. Walt Disney in 1942 works with live reindeer. They served as the nature for the animation of the film Bambi. The studio's artists used these animals as references to achieve realistic plasticity of the characters' movements and facial expressions. Lucille Ball, bowling in the 1940s. Before becoming an icon of comedy television in the show I Love Lucy, she already attracted attention with her charisma, style, and appearance. A man poses with 3 saw-nosed fish caught in the 1940s. These rare marine life, with characteristic serrated saws on their snouts, were once found in the coastal waters of the United States. But today, they are on the verge of extinction due to overfishing and habitat destruction. Winston Churchill with the Thompson submachine gun in training before the Normandy landings, circa 1944. Dwight Eisenhower is in the background. This moment symbolizes the determination of the Allies on the eve of one of the largest operations of the Second World War. American and Russian soldiers exchange rations. Bosnia, February 1996. A rare moment of cooperation after the Cold War. The opening of Shmuel Park on Staten Island, 1938. Young people play volleyball and enjoy the vastness of the new public space. Aviation at the dawn of its era. Pilots and technical staff at Hangar No. 38 at Miller Field Army Airfield, Staten Island, 1938. The sign on the sign shows the WPA employment program. Staten Island, 1934. The last 3 veterans of the American Civil War take part in a Memorial Day celebration. The veterans marched in the parade and honored the memory of their fallen comrades. Romantic dinner in New York, 1943. A young couple shares a cigarette at a table in a restaurant, surrounded by the noise of a big city and the lights of wartime. Equipment for U.S. forest firefighters, 1930s. The simplest tools: lanterns, canisters, shovels, knapsack sprayers, axes, and protective covers. Everything that the fighters had to fight fire in the deep forests. One of the early attempts to synchronize sound and image in cinema. The prototype from FBA Princeton, 1929, is a turntable connected to a movie projector, with the ability to work from 1 to 3 discs. Silver King Mine Forge, Arizona, 1876. Tools for miners were forged here and equipment was repaired, a life support center on the edge of the American frontier. A scene from a saloon in the Wild West, presumably Wyoming, 1880s. Visitors threaten a man with a gun, forcing him to dance, a typical but gloomy element of the saloon entertainment culture of that time. Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio on their honeymoon in Japan, 1954. The picture was taken on the coast while fishing. In the background is a car from the 1950s. Elizabeth II and Prince Philip in Malta, 1949. The photo was taken during their honeymoon. The prince served in the Navy and the couple lived in the Valletta area. Lifeguard training at Howard University swimming pool, 1941. African American female students study against the background of racial segregation in the United States. Refugee children from the Second World War look at the Statue of Liberty from the deck of a ship at the entrance to the Port of New York, 1946. The United States accepted refugees after the end of the war. Babe Ruth and Yogi Berra on the baseball field, 1947. The New York Yankees legends are one of the greatest sluggers in history and an iconic catcher. Military police are on duty in Times Square on the night of December 31st, 1941 to January 1st, 1942. The United States only entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Marilyn Monroe is pictured reading a book to a child at a colleague's house. The picture was taken in 1947 when the actress worked at the studio and moonlighted as a nanny. The inscription "Toys" is visible on the cover of the book, and an edition of Story Rhymes is lying on the floor next to it. Representatives of the indigenous peoples of the United States register to vote in New Mexico in 1948. This year, American Indians were officially granted the right to vote in the state for the first time, despite the adoption of the Federal Citizenship Act in 1924. Ukrainian women with PPSH-41 submachine guns, 1942. During World War II, they joined regular partisan detachments to fight the German occupation. The USSR actively attracted women to armed resistance, especially in the territories of Ukraine and Belarus. Glenn's Work Identification Pass, issued in 1943 at the U.S. Army Quartermaster Depot in Utah. Such tokens were used to control the access of personnel, including employees who serviced military infrastructure, including railways. Women undergo shooting training as part of the Los Angeles Police Women's School, LAPS, program, 1948. These courses became part of the reforms aimed at attracting women to law enforcement agencies after the Second World War. Betty White on KNBH, now KNBC television, Los Angeles, 1949. At this time, she was starting her career, becoming one of the first female producers on television. Italian cyclist Gino Ciardi gets chain lubrication on the move during the Tour de France, 1949. Such an escort service was a common practice in racing at that time. A woman water skis on Spirit Lake, Washington, at the time of the eruption of Mount St. Helens on May 18, 1980. The explosion was the largest in U.S. history and claimed 57 lives. Arnold Schwarzenegger takes the oath of office upon obtaining U.S. citizenship in 1983. A native of Austria, he arrived in America in 1968 without knowing the language, becoming a symbol of the American dream. From a bodybuilder to a Hollywood star and politician. The set of the original Ghostbusters movie, 1984. The photo shows a miniature model of a New York street with the iconic chubby Marshmallow Man, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, one of the main visual effects of the painting. Women from the WAC Corps in training at Fort Oglethorpe, USA, on May 1, 1944. They trained for service in the U.S. Army during World War II, including medicine and frontline support.